Welcome to the US More News channel. Watch the video to the end to find out the current and breaking news about the Russian war in Ukraine. Ukraine, a large scale he succeeded in the prisoner exchange. This time, 108 women returned home. Presidential Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak announced this. This was the first all-female exchange. It was published in. Of the Ukrainian, 35 are from the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 32 from the Navy, 12 from the Territorial Defense Forces, 8 from the National Guard of Ukraine, 2 from the Azov Regiment, 50 was with the State Transportation Service, Ukrainian State Border Guard Service, and 12 civilians. Among the decommissioned were women who were illegally arrested and imprisoned in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, which were temporarily occupied before the large-scale offensive. People have been imprisoned since 2019 for extreme pro-Ukrainian attitudes in the so-called Republic, which manifest themselves in the delivery of humanitarian aid to orphans, artificial intelligence, and terrorism, Andriy Yermak writes. Survivor. The doctor's research was conducted in Russian detention, and on October 13, a prisoner exchange took place in Ukraine of more than 20 defenders, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Territorial Defense Forces, the National Guard of Ukraine, and the Navy. Transfer to Ukraine. On October 11, 32 defenders returned home, 3 officers, 28 soldiers, and 1 sailor. As of October 2nd, Ukraine has exchanged 2 prisoners and brought back 808 people from Russian captivity. Putin spoke at length. Our president expressed his understanding on this issue. He conveyed his demands and views on being a human being. Mr. Putin had quick reflexes. It gave results in a short time. We will start the operation when we receive guarantees, Putin said. This is part of the guarantee. We have been saying this to my European and American colleagues for 2 months. If you want the shipment to continue, you should stop the sanctions. There are also poorer African countries. If necessary, we will give it to African countries for free, Putin said. This should not be seen as a purely political solution. Taking him to poor countries was a real problem. Our president's leadership diplomacy has borne fruit. The day after his meeting with Putin, he met with Putin at 16:30. We have received instructions from Putin. The process will begin when Ukraine receives guarantees, Shoigu told our defense minister. Ukraine's constructive attitude is also very important. Western countries say that Turkey is moving away from the West. They should impose an embargo on Russia. Who will talk to the Russians if everyone breaks off relations with Russia? The only leader who can do this is our president. Don't just say well done to support a grain supply contract. We are talking about an environment where there is no conflict. Today, the war cry outweighed the demands for peace. Nuclear war is a risk comes on the screen. There is a threat of nuclear war. Nuclear warheads are in the hands of both countries. When the Cold War ended, we moved to a unipolar world. 1 superpower up, 2 or 3 superpowers down. At the very bottom there is a pyramid with medium-sized countries. This pyramid is starting to fail. Turkey is in a new step, President Erdogan said during a meeting with Putin and Zelensky. We are worried about using nuclear weapons. And other leaders that the prolongation and spread of the war is always ahead. The threat of nuclear war. Turkey Kalik noted that Turkey is taking new steps to end the war and said in a statement on the issue, this concerns only grain supplies. The ceasefire and the final agreement process extending to the requested countries. No conflict, use your expressions. Russia's military leadership has come under heavy criticism for delaying the invasion of Ukraine. 2 voices in particular are decisively heard among critics. Putin's allies are Chechen leader Ramadan Kadyrov and media baron and founder of private mercenary company Wagner Yevgeny Prigozhin. These 2 people are not officially the heads of any military and security institutes of Russia, but they still find a way to criticize military commanders. Russia's war in Ukraine has shattered the image of the army as an efficient and well-functioning institution. This was due to promises made on state television that Kiev would be captured within 3 days or that Ukraine would retake most of the occupied territories. The newly appointed head of Russian forces in Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin, may have his only success after taking office in Ukraine's exploding power plants. Criticism of Kadyrov and Prigozhin has not been curbed so far. According to unconfirmed information, the commander of the central region of Russia, General Alexandry Lapin, who was criticized by Kadyrov, was dismissed last week. In his telegram message dated October 1st, Kadyrov said, "If it were up to me, I would make Lapin a soldier, take away all his honors, give him a weapon to smear his shame with blood and send him to the front." And he later described it as inadequate. An important role in this criticism was played by Lapin's withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the east. Yevgeny Prigozhin also joined the criticism. He even praised Volodymyr Zelensky as strong, safe, practical, and kind. But he certainly has high privileges. For example, he toured Russian prisons and recruited prisoners to fight in Ukraine. This permission is not given to everyone. Yevgeny Prigozhin first became known as Putin's chef because he served food and drinks to the Kremlin at special events. The second largest city in Russia is St. Petersburg. Businessmen knew Putin from the 1990s when he worked in his city office and dined at his restaurant. Until the 2010s, Prigozhin was named in some newspaper works. The disinformation unit based in St. Petersburg was known as the Troll Factory. In 2016, the Troll Factory was part of an investigation by then U.S. Special Counsel Robert Mueller into Russia's alleged attempt to interfere in the U.S. presidential election. She also admitted too late that Wagner, with whom she had been denying their relationship for years, was behind it. Wagner first appeared in eastern Ukraine in 2001, after which his troops were also seen in Syria and many African countries. It is currently one of Russia's most effective forces in the war in Ukraine. He comes to Kadyrov. Few of Putin's allies are as loyal to him as Chechen leader Kadyrov. Kadyrov is the Chechen leader chosen by Putin in 2007 to head the Autonomous Republic of the North Caucasus. Chechnya fought an unsuccessful war of independence in the 1990s. When human rights violations were raised and militia groups known as Kadyrovs were accused of harassment, Kadyrov put an end to Chechnya's attempts at independence. Kadyrov supported the invasion of Russia from the very beginning. Kadyrovцы sent troops to the region, claiming that they were the best trained, bravest, and most brutal occupation forces in Russia. Kadyrov, recognized by the Kremlin, received the highest military rank. It may be cruel, but this group also acts like TikTok soldiers. Because instead of fighting, they are more interested in sharing their exploits on social media. The human rights activist reported that a significant number of Chechen soldiers were conscripted against their will after their families were threatened with physical violence or blackmail. Kadyrov and Prigozhin, who have never participated, have been more compliant lately. Chechen leaders described the St. Petersburg businessman as born fighters and Wagner's soldiers as fearless Russian patriots. On the contrary, he received praise from Prigozhin on social networks. Both criticized the military structure represented by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Kadyrov and Prigozhin may have a higher level of influence in an environment where they are portrayed as responsible for Russia's failures in Ukraine. But commentators argue that neither the Chechen leader nor Wagner's leader has enough weight. They are not supported by the official political elite and are considered outsiders. But if they join the armed forces, they can force the names of Putin's inner circle. Russian political analyst Abbas Galyamov says that Kadyrov and Prigozhin's behavior is extremely unusual for a country at war. It seems that the vertical federal power system created by Putin is not working where it is needed most, in the army. Galyamov describes the current situation as an atmosphere of anarchy, in which the commanders of various military units argue with each other instead of fighting as a team. According to experts from the American Institute for Military Studies, there are two different groups in Putin's inner circle: those who want to end the war in order to revive trade frozen by Western sanctions, and those who support its continuation. These two men want to continue the war. These may be the messages the Russian leader wants to hear the most, and Putin can keep them to himself if he wants. Andrei Zakharov and Ilya Barabanov contributed to this article. The European Union is providing in October €500 million to support the capacity and resilience of the Ukrainian armed forces. It was announced by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Assistance is provided by the European Peace Fund. The total financing provided by the European Union from the fund is €3.1 billion. The additional funding of €500 million allocated by the EU member states is another example of our ongoing commitment to support the armed forces of Ukraine in order to protect the country against October's growing illegal aggression. As previously reported, the foreign ministers of the European Union approved the creation of a military training mission in Ukraine. This applies to the training of up to 15,000 Ukrainian servicemen. Instead of a single training center in the European Union countries, separate trainings should be organized according to sectors. Poland is one of the countries where the Ukrainian army is being trained under this task. On October 15th, the U.S. Department of Defense announced a new military assistance to Ukraine in the amount of $725 million. This defense assistance includes weapons and equipment for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. As the war continues in full swing in Ukraine, Lavrov made the statement that the world has been waiting for. The Russian foreign minister announced the terms of peace in Moscow. The eyes and ears of the world have been watching the Ukrainian news since February 2nd. The war, which began on the orders of Russian President Putin, is in full swing in the eastern regions of Ukraine. The flash move came from Russia, which has been on the defensive against the onslaught of the Ukrainian army for some time. The statement that the world has been waiting for came from Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister announced the terms of peace in Moscow. In an interview with Russian state television, Lavrov decried the possibility of negotiations between Russia and the West. "We are always ready to listen if our Western colleagues make a new request to hold a new meeting," Lavrov said, Newsweek reported. The Russian minister explained two conditions that the West must accept in order for the negotiations to be successful. Lavrov said that the West should fully take into account the interests and security of the Russian Federation. Secondly, Lavrov said that if the West thinks that it can bring our nation to its knees with such methods of serious approaches to Moscow that will help reduce blood pressure, it is wrong if Russia thinks that by such methods it can bring our nation to its knees. Zelensky said that Russia should submit. "If we are approached with realistic proposals based on these principles of respect, we will approach it as always," the Russian minister said. Ukrainian President Zelensky announced the only condition for peace in Kyiv. Zelensky announced that Russia should completely leave Ukraine in order to start negotiations to end the war. Zelensky stressed that the Ukrainian people will not accept another formula, and in his statement, he included the following statements: "How Russia withdraws from our country is also important for the next negotiations. If they withdraw, another table will be set up. If we throw them out, another negotiating table will be set up. The path they choose will not only determine our future, but it's also theirs." Pointing out that Russia's attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure have left million people without electricity in 9 regions, Zelensky referred to the claim that the mobilization has been completed. "I don't think they should hurry. They need a new wave of mobilization soon." Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to be informed of the developments at the speed of light.